Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookish Realm, and I'm here with another video. Today is day number 15 of Vlogmas. That means that we only have 10 days left, y'all. Holy crap, I can't believe I've done 15 videos. This is crazy, like all of this, just thinking about like what else I have going on, like work and stuff, and still doing this. It has been a phenomenal experience. I know I keep talking about it, y'all, but this whole concept of doing this is really crazy. So once again, as always, like, thank y'all so much for your support and the comments, and for those of you who are watching as much as you can. If you've only watched one video or whatever you've done, like, the support has been amazing, and I really appreciate it. So as you can see by the title of this video, we're going to be talking about some books today that have changed my life. And I got the idea to do this video when I listened to my grown-up Christmas list, and this does not directly correlate, but I was thinking about how the fact that when we go from being children to adults, there are things that change and shape us, and what we may want as a 5-year-old for Christmas is not what we're gonna want at the age of 30 years old. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some books that have really shaped me and have introduced me to different genres, books that have changed my perspectives about things, books that have educated me and have led me really to become the person that I am right now. And I am a firm believer that you never stop learning, you never stop evolving. So though these books have shaped me now, I know probably 10 years from now I'll be talking about a different set of books that have shaped me into the reader and the human that I am overall. So as always, before we start the discussion about the books, let's talk a little bit about this song. So the song Grown Up Christmas List was originally done in 1990 by David Foster. The vocals of this song were done by Natalie Cole. And believe it or not, I was surprised to find out that Natalie Cole was on the song, and it wasn't a hit until 1992 when Amy Grant recorded a version of the song for her Christmas album, and it ended up getting a lot of radio play. It then died off a little bit and then was revived again in 2003 by Kelly Clarkson, which is the version that I'm most familiar with, when she sang the song on a Christmas special of American Idol. So that's when people started listening to the song again. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the books. Some of these, never mind, I was about to say some of these are not that hard. I think there's only like one book that's not a hard-hitting book, but that's my personality, y'all. If you did not know, or if you're a new subscriber, I read a lot of very hard-hitting, impactful books. I definitely love books that teach me something new. I don't expect that with every book, but those are books that I actively search for. So you're gonna kind of see this pattern throughout the books that I'm going to talk about. So the first one that I have here is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and ironically, this book has kind of made me stop reading Toni Morrison. I haven't read this book in I think in about 4 or 5 years, and I never picked up another Toni Morrison book, not because I didn't like this book. I can't say that I enjoyed this book because I don't think it's an enjoyment, but it is a experience. That's the best way I know how to put it, reading Toni Morrison, and you take her slowly. Brilliant writer. This book for me really was impactful in teaching me about the Black experience in a way that I did not know historically, and one that we're still dealing with today. I think that this book touches on a lot of things, but it really looks at the structure of the Black community internally. And one of the things that I really took from this book was my first experience really understanding how harmful and impactful colorism is to the Black community. I know colorism affects other communities globally, but I don't think I was truly aware of how bad it is until I read this. So since then I've read quite a few other books that deal with colorism, but this one definitely was like my first gateway into it. And it is about a little girl who essentially wants to have blue eyes like a white girl, and how even today proximity to whiteness is more acceptable socially at large and also within the Black community. There are a lot of different topics talked about in this book, so many different triggers in this book. I definitely would just be mindful, look up, because I don't even have a list myself because it's been so long and I don't want to inaccurately describe it, but I do know that I would look for reviews that definitely give you some trigger warnings or content warnings, because they're definitely in this book. But it made me more self-aware because I had definitely grown up in a predominantly white community, gone to private schools up until middle school, and did not realize how disconnected I was from the Black community in some aspects, and how much I was even trying to align myself with whiteness before I kind of got a couple of wake-up calls in my own personal life. And I think that this definitely pulled the wool from over my eyes with a lot of different things. I'm hoping to read more Toni Morrison next year, but this one was just so tough. I was like, oh my goodness gracious, like I feel like everything that I read is definitely going to be a tough adventure, but yes, this definitely holds a special place in my life. So the next one that I have is super personal, and it's going to reveal a part of me that I think nobody in this community really knows. So here we go. Kind of nervous about doing this. The next book that I have that has changed my life or shaped my life is Borderline Personality Disorder Demystified, an essential guide for understanding and living with BPD. So I think I had talked about this a while ago on my channel, maybe I did, but I don't think anybody probably remembers that, and I can't even remember to tell you which video it is. But I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder in about 2015, and it is a shocking feeling to be diagnosed with a personality disorder. I went through a huge period in my life where I did not know who I was. I felt like my personality and my identity was such a mismatch of taking pieces from other people that I had no sense of self, which is part of borderline personality disorder. And it was tough. I remember leaving the doctor and being like, so who am I? Like, how do I live my life? How do I function? And you know, this is something that they think gets easier to cope with as you get older. I can say now, at the point that I'm in my life, like I still deal with it. I actively deal with it on a daily basis, but the feelings and the symptoms of it are not as bad like when I was probably in my early 20s. And now being in my late 20s, it's easier for me to kind of recognize when something is flaring up, for lack of a better term, because even now talking about it, BPD is very, very hard to describe in terms of what it's like to live with it. I mean, you can see the symptoms of it, but working around it and learning and having to go to like specialized therapy, like, so I'm always an advocate for therapy and mental health. I'm not ashamed to say I think everybody should go to therapy. Everybody should talk to somebody about what's going on in their life. And for me, I can't go to regular therapy. I have to go to specialized therapy that specifically deals with it's called DBT therapy, that I have to go to. And I always try to tell people who don't necessarily get it is that I have a difficult time behaving And it's not true 100%, but that's the easiest way, like, I personally know how to describe it, is like I have a difficult time behaving and learning how to control my emotions and not seeing things black and white. And therapy has kind of taught me how to work through emotions when I get to certain points. And like, anger is a huge thing that I've had to learn how to manage and deal with, and not be so black and white in situations. But this book particularly, like, it really guided me through some really, really low points, especially dealing with, you know, people in your life who don't believe that this stuff is real, or growing up in a community where you feel like people are just going to tell you to pray it away. And that was just really tough. It was such a hard time for me in my life. And now I feel like, because there are aspects of this personality disorder that are not just like environmental, but also can be like genetic, I am better prepared that if this was something that eventually made its way down to my children, I would be better prepared to kind of handle it, because I know that my family wasn't. And I'm not the only person in my family, I feel like, that has BPD, but I'm the first person in the family that has gotten diagnosed with it officially. So yeah, this was an important book. It still is an important book. I still have a copy of this book. I just don't have it in this room. It's in my bedroom with my other nonfiction stuff. And it is a book that I reference a lot. It is a book that I use to help people understand what it's like to be in a close personal relationship with someone that has BPD, and how someone who has BPD, how they function, and how it explains a lot of behaviors that you probably would typically find abnormal, but it's not abnormal for us necessarily. So the next one that I have on this list is Just Mercy, and this is one that I actually read this year. I started to delve a little bit more into nonfiction prior to a lot of the reading that happened this summer after the murder of George Floyd. I know there was a height in people reading books specifically about the Black experience and about race, but I decided to read this one because I believe that my boss had read it, and I can't remember if we talked about it or what happened with it. I can't remember how, but I found out more about this book at work, and I finally made the decision to pick it up. And this one, I think, is a book that I classify as changing my life, because it made me a lot more aware of really how the justice system works. I mean, I can say till I'm blue in the face that, you know, everyone is aware that our judicial system here in the United States is not, it doesn't work. I think we all know that, but reading this made me actively aware of how unfair it is, and how it is a system that is completely and totally broken. Not that I wasn't aware of that, but the details behind how broken it is, I did not realize how horrible and how twisted our system is, and how people of color in this country are just, I mean, the treatment the treatment of people. And this is one of these books where, like I said, like, you know something to be true, but sometimes when you find out the details of certain situations, of certain like blanket statements, it makes you reevaluate a lot of things that you perceive to be true, and it changes your way of thinking. And it definitely changed my way of thinking, and it made me even more aware of the total Black experience. Next, I have Hood Feminism on this list by Mickey Kendall. This is one that I read this year. And Hood Feminism really answered the question that I had about myself. I had never called myself a feminist, and I never could figure out why. And I was like, you know, there are things that the feminist movement was doing that I definitely was on board for, but I just never felt comfortable using the word feminism and attaching it to myself. And this is why. Hood Feminism explained why I had that feeling, because there aspects of the feminist movement now. I think the discussions around it are getting better, and I think that more advocacy is going to happen in the future that will be inclusive of women of color and trans women of color. But I just couldn't put into words why I was feeling the way that I was feeling, and this book did that completely. And it made me realize that it was because there were things that were impacting my life as a Black woman that the feminist movement wasn't addressing. So I never felt completely comfortable attaching myself to a movement that didn't 100% advocate for all women. And this book made me realize those connections and why I just couldn't. And it definitely helped me realize how the movement has left out trans women of color and how it's negatively impacted them. And this book also taught me and shaped me. Now, if you ever hear me have these discussions, it taught me that I am no longer comfortable with allyship. I think that allyship is a good place to start. I will always say that, but this book definitely made me realize that there is a strong difference between allyship and being an accomplice, and that in order to really make a change, we need more accomplices in the world than just people who are calling themselves allies. So this was a twofold book for me in terms of shaping, like, not only my perspective of the feminist movement and how it treats women of color and trans women of color, but then also how I now look at the definitions and the use of ally and accomplice. The next one that I have on here is actually a picture book, and it is called Separate is Never Equal, Sylvia Mendez and Her Family's Fight for Desegregation. I think that this book really gave me a taste of someone else's history and how the whole conversation of segregation, when we hear segregation, we automatically think Jim Crow, black and white, and we don't really think of any other groups at all. And this book definitely woke me up out of that attitude, because this focuses on a young girl that is of Mexican and Puerto Rican descent, and her family's fight to desegregate a school in California. And this happened 10 years before Brown versus the Board of Education. So to know that there were fights for desegregation prior to that case, and not just between black and whites, but also other groups, it was like, okay, you know, I think sometimes it's easy for me to live in a bubble and think only of the things that impact me, which in a lot of ways is completely selfish. And it's easy. I mean, we all do it, where we think about what has impacted us and what affects us, but that's not the world, and that's not everybody's experience. And this is one that definitely has made me more aware of what other people have gone through, which is why I always say that books can help foster empathy, and this is one that did that for me. The next one that I have is one that I actually read this year, and this is We Are Not From Here. Okay, so this is, first of all, this is a difficult book. I've talked about this book a lot, but I think that this book has really shaped me in thinking about how we have discussions about people who are coming into the United States as immigrants and refugees, and the humanize that occurs with the conversations now. I think that I knew, once again, I think I knew, but I don't think I really knew how intense it was and how difficult it was, and understanding that I have privilege and some experiences, even though I may not have privilege in other experiences. And this definitely impacted my life in a way that I didn't expect, and coming even more empathetic to learning more about other people's experiences, because this focuses on 3 teenagers who are trying to leave Guatemala and cross into Mexico to cross into the United States. And talking about the difficult journey that these kids had to make, and that this happens in real life. And I can't remember the name of the train. I think in English it's the Beast, and how dangerous that shit is. I did not know that. I was not actively aware. I think we have such a black and white image of how people immigrate into this country, whether they're documented or undocumented. But that whole experience I was not aware of. And to know that people are so desperate to leave their countries, they're willing to die. I will never have to feel that experience. I will never have to go through that. My child will never have to go through that. And I think being a parent, it made me even more aware, because of the fact that there are kids who are dying trying to make it to the United States, and then when they get here they're treated so poorly. And I knew about the treatment that happened here because it's, you know, it has been constantly talked about on the news, but the journey itself has been documented. But I don't know if a lot of people are aware of it. I know that I was not aware of the severity, and I think that once again this is a book that has made me question how in tune I am with global perspectives, and not being so Western centric, like just thinking about what happens in the West, specifically like what happens in the States, and not looking at this global picture of what happens to other communities around the world. And it has given me a lot of time to do self-reflection on a lot of different things, but I didn't expect this book to do that, but it definitely has altered that part of me. The next book that I have on this list is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and I think that most people may be familiar with the story of Henrietta Lacks, but I did not realize, I did not completely understand how negative the relationship is between the Black community and the healthcare system. I did not realize how bad it was. I knew about the Tuskegee experiments, but the fact that we have modern medicine from a Black woman whose family has never been compensated for the use of her body, essentially. I mean, it's her body. And I think that in terms of shaping my life, it has explained for me some familial things that have gone on in terms of how family members have felt about doctors. And I don't think I ever really understood why. They knew, I'm sure, maybe not specifically about this story, but just knowing how difficult the relationship has been between the Black community. And this one just made me think about certain things that I had seen growing up, and why it all made sense then. All of it just came forward and made sense. And I think once again this kind of goes back to, you know, a blanket statement of something, but when you start learning the particulars, it's like, once again, the wool is pulled from your eyes and you're like, wow. So this is why. It's such an explanation. And I look at things so differently now, even with my own personal situation that I had when I gave birth to my daughter. I was very, very weary of certain things, and you start to look at relationships differently. You start to question things differently. There's certain things that you're not willing to do, or, you know, Black women now are very, very huge advocates for having doulas present whenever you're giving birth, to advocate for you. So I definitely had that conversation with my mom. My mom was a huge advocate for me during my birthing experience, and listening and reading books like this, it makes you a different person. It shapes you to look at relationships with the medical field very, very differently. And I don't want to say that it creates distrust, but it makes you more aware and more likely to question things instead of just saying yes. And the last one that I have on this list is 10,000 Dresses, and this is another picture book. And this one has made me a huge advocate for windows and mirrors in terms of teaching children when they're young. I think that adults are always going to be a little bit more difficult to shape because we have been molded. Not saying that we can't change, but I think it takes a little bit more time. And I think that using terms like windows and mirrors, or understanding what windows and mirrors are for kids, is super important when they're young and they're moldable. And I didn't have the term for what I was seeing until I got to library school. But this book is about a young boy who loves to wear dresses. He wants to design dresses, and he can only dream about his dresses. And he can't wear his dresses, and he can't design his dresses in real life because people constantly attempt to remind him that he's a boy and a boy is not supposed to wear dresses. And I didn't realize how important it was for kids to be able to see other experiences outside of their own until I picked up this book, because I'm a firm believer, like I said before about another book, that books help foster empathy. When kids have the opportunity to see other people's experiences that are not deemed as abnormal or out of the norm, they are more empathetic. They are more understanding of different experiences, and I just never thought about that until I picked up this book, where I was like, you know what, I wish that I would have had a book like this when I was younger, because I had to shape and grow as an adult to really learn about different things. And you know, it took me even a while, I'm not ashamed to admit, to understand the role that the binary has done to our community, and low-key just being destructive and creating spaces where people can't be themselves. And I didn't realize that until I got older. But having books like this and teaching kids stuff like this when they're younger just helps make for a more empathetic and more understanding generation. And that's why with Mirrors and Windows, I always believe that kids should have access to books where they see themselves, which is mirrors, but then windows where they have the opportunity to look out and see other people's experiences, and having a balance of those two help shape and mold just great individuals. All right, y'all, so those are some books that have shaped and molded me and have just changed my life. If you don't mind commenting below, tell me 1 or 2 books that have shaped or molded you, or if you just want to tell me a book that has taught you a lot about your own experiences, or a book that maybe has taught you a lot about someone else's experiences. I would love to hear about those. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. As always, if you're looking for ways to support my channel, be down in the description box below. If you're looking for ways to follow me on social media, they'll be down in the links below in the description box. I just tore that whole thing up, but whatever. The point. I'll be back with another video tomorrow, y'all.